Welcome, everyone. So I'm Jing. I'm chair of the Mentorship Committee and also a designer at EHDD. Thank you all today for calling in. So today we have the Journey to Entrepreneurship and Questions Part 1. This is part of the Mentorship Committee's discussion series. And then just a couple things before we start. If you are calling in right now, I see people still filing in. Please mute your microphones for this session, just so avoid excessive background noise. And also, if you have any question, on the bottom of the toolbar, you should see a chat button, and you can type questions in there. There will be a Q&A sessions at the end, so you can also unmute yourself then to ask questions. If you go to the sponsor slide, Marissa, just wanted to thank all the sustaining sponsors on the second page for AIASF. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So next, you see outlook of all the events of Mentorship Committee. Next slide. Yeah. So today, as I said before, today is the part 1. There's also a part 2 with breakout rooms and more discussions in November. So make sure to tune in on the AIASF website and register for that part for the continuation of this discussion. So the discussion series from the Mentorship Committee, we're doing our short discussion topics that are usually an hour and a half long with different breakout rooms on different topics. We've hosted various topics, include diversity, equity, inclusivity before, and also we try to mingle in some casual events like social bingo. There's a trivia coming up and a movie event coming up. On October 21st, we have a discussion geared towards students that allows them to ask questions on architecture profession and mentorship in general. We also encourage our architects to call in to help answer and provide your insight on these issues. Next. So hello.
So sorry, I had a delay and the screen is, I don't know where we're at.
Yeah, so I think we lost the audio for a minute. I'm not sure when that happened. Can you guys let me know where I should continue? Great, thanks. I was going through the event list, and also I was going onto the contact page saying that if anybody has any questions, concerns, feedbacks, can contact us. And then I guess I jumped straight into the event for today, and I want to introduce you all to Marissa Priana. And so she is the immediate past chair of the Mentorship Committee, and who recently moved to LA. She's an entrepreneur herself and created Priana Architecture in 2009. She worked on projects, residential restoration, retail, and workplace projects in California. She's also an avid adventure traveler who goes on architectural and food pilgrimages. So she will be the moderator for the event. Marissa, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jang. I want to also thank Jang and the AIA Mentorship Committee, as well as AIASF for sponsoring this, and thank you. So the journey of entrepreneurship. Today we're going to explore what it takes to start, sustain, and thrive in business of architecture. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our firm owners that will help guide us on their path to help you find yours. So first up is Jennifer. She has started her practice Studio Oxeye in Sacramento in 2018. The firm focuses on single family, multifamily, and commercial projects. Their projects are located in California and Hawaii. She also serves on the AIA Central Valley Board of Directors and was the founder of the chapter's Committee for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. She also serves as a member of the Sacramento County Design Review Advisory Committee, and she considers herself an educator, activist, entrepreneur, and citizen architect. Next is Audrey. She opened Studio Maven in San Francisco in 2015. The firm specializes on custom residential in San Francisco, and she draws inspiration from urban environment around her, and she commutes everywhere by bicycle and enjoys exploring the city streets that she's never been to. Next is Douglas. He opened AE3 Partners in San Francisco. They also have offices in Oakland and Los Angeles in 2007. They specialize in education, aviation, transportation, institutional science, technology projects throughout California. Doug has served on boards of local nonprofit, including Oakland Builders Alliance, 100 Black Men of the Bay, and he has mentored emerging professionals, including myself. In his free time, Douglas is an avid general aviation pilot and cyclist. Next is Jonathan. He opened Feldman Architects in San Francisco in 2003. The firm specializes in custom residential, commercial, office hospitality. Their projects are located throughout California, Hawaii, Oregon, Massachusetts, and New Mexico. Jonathan enjoys sharing his knowledge of architecture and sustainable design by practicing on panels and regularly serves on competition juries for local and national design awards. He lives in San Francisco with his wife, 2 daughters, and an ever-increasing number of rescue animals. Dominique has opened As Is in San Francisco in 2016. The project types she likes to work on are work, dwell, learn, and play. Their projects are located throughout California. She has lectured worldwide, is a featured panelist and juror for AIA, has served on committee members and jurors for the IIDA, board member of the Tally High Neighborhood Association, and is a chair for the Transbury Advisory Committee. Her work is built on a passion for social infrastructure. So as we get started, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to answer some questions to kind of help navigate their journey through entrepreneurship. So Dominique, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. What made you decide to start a firm, and what was the hardest thing that you had to overcome in the first year?
Yeah, just starting my own firm was sort of a longer journey for me. A lot of people start sort of younger in their career, where I started a little bit more established. So when I talk about architecture, for me, that it's when some sort of change occurs based on the thing that we bring into the world. And for every project, that for me is really different. And what I found practicing before starting my own firm, there's a lot of times the business and the management of projects often overshadows the sort of the conversation that are required to even make that architectural advancement. So without that, I was finding the work to be a little less rewarding. So I had always practiced architecture and interior design as one kind of event before moving to San Francisco. And when I moved to San Francisco, I really wanted to focus on large scale projects. And what I saw a little different with the firms that I had been working with is that architecture and interiors were really sort of alienated. And I really love the sort of disciplined approach of architecture. And I also really admired and loved the folks who were practicing interiors solely. I saw that they had a sense of freedom and liberty that was really inspiring. And so when I started my own firm, I started it to bring those two things together. So those were the main drivers for starting the firm.
And what was the hardest thing that you overcame in that first year?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things for me was really making sure that before I founded a practice, I felt confident. And for me, there's sort of a lot of entities in that. And so what I did is I kind of made a list of all the things, the barriers between me and starting that firm. Some of them were financial, some were liability issues, some were clients. And I just went through and I really checked off each of those items on the list. For me, it was really just about knowing that I was in great shape to make that step.
Wonderful. Jonathan, would you like to answer the same question next?
Can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what made you decide to start a firm?
Sure. I think it was, I was working for a couple of different small firms. And I think it was just sort of a restless spirit of kind of not being happy following somebody else's program and kind of wanting to go off and explore on my own. I think I was always a little bit of an unruly student who didn't like too much authority, I would say. So it was just that independent nature. And also, I'm always interested in a million different things, and kind of the alignment of my interests with my boss's interests and the company interests, just going off on my own allowed me to gain control over kind of following my passions and exploring things. I think I'm also a bit of a risk taker, and there wasn't that much opportunity to do that in somebody else's company. Taking risks is a bit of a liability. When you're working on your own, it's sort of a requisite and one of those things that kind of has a lot of benefits when you are being entrepreneurial.
Definitely. And what was the hardest thing that you had to overcome in the first year?
It was really hard to find any work that was interesting. I was at a firm that was doing interesting work, and when I went out on my own, I had to kind of beg, borrow, and steal for jobs that had very little design interest. So I had to kind of get excited about the facts that weren't the architectural interesting parts of it and find interest in just business development and finding projects and learning how to fill in all the gaps in my knowledge. And so there was tons of challenges. They just weren't that kind of classic design challenges of which we all love and want to do. So I think there was just this need for me to reevaluate and assess and find reward in areas of the work that weren't the traditional classic design carrots that architects are always seeking.
Definitely. So reorienting those expectations.
Yeah, and the focus. I think all architects have to reorient because very few architects get to just design. So much of architecture, whether you're working for yourself, is not about design. But you get a crash course in that when you go off and do your own projects, for sure.
Well, thank you. I'm actually, Jennifer, would you like to answer the question next?
Sure. Yeah, I can really relate to Jonathan's answer. I've always been kind of a rebel at heart, and I think that I've worked for some really great firms that I learned a lot from, and I admire a lot of the people I've worked for. But I have always kind of had that passion for adventure, and Marissa, you can probably relate to that adventure spirit. Just kind of wanting to seek new challenges and take risks and kind of fly by the seat of my pants and learn along the way. I definitely I didn't feel ready and definitely didn't prepare myself as much as some people do when they start a firm. But I've been able to kind of embrace that fear of the unknown along the way and teach myself things that I needed to. With that being said, I still don't know it all, obviously. I don't think anyone does. but yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted to be a leader in architecture one day, and was kind of getting a little impatient and decided I needed to create that path for myself. So I hired myself as the firm owner and principal, and
Oh, Jennifer, I think we lost you. Oh, there you are.
sorry, I got a phone call. All good now.
So what was the hardest thing you had to overcome in the first year of business?
I think I can relate to the first answer about confidence. I think in the beginning, it was a little hard to know when to say no to clients or when to kind of redirect clients about their design ideas. I think that's something that just growing into the profession, I've gotten a lot better at, just saying, I don't know if that's a good idea. Let's think about a different way to approach it. Not to say that clients always listen, but I think just building that confidence takes time. And that was probably the biggest struggle in the beginning. And then also just setting up all the systems and really knowing I really wanted to do it right. And I really wanted to do everything legally and have my liability in check. So that was definitely a struggle and a lot of frustration and maybe a little bit of money wasted in certain places. But, I learned.
Did you find any good resources when doing that dig for setting up everything up correctly?
Yeah, honestly, I think just local small business organizations, there's kind of nonprofits that offer information. We have a nice small business resource in Sacramento. And then also just talking to colleagues who have started their own firms have been very supportive and helpful, and answering my annoying questions in the beginning about, what do I do? I don't know what to do with this. And I was really grateful for that too. So I recommend reaching out to your colleagues and developing a network of people that support each other. We're all in this together, even though we're maybe sometimes competing for the same projects. Ultimately, we need to support each other and in the journey.
Yeah. Well, I definitely like what you said about confidence. I do think that earning clients' trust comes with having that confidence. If you
Definitely.
don't believe in yourself, how are they going to? So,
Right, for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Doug, would you like to answer the question next? So the question is, what made you decide to start your own firm?
So, I think in the family that I grew up in, had a couple uncles that were attorneys. My dad had his own business. There was definitely a kind of a very heavy entrepreneurial spirit from the get-go. So I think it was just a given that, at some point we basically would, join a profession or something like that. But, we would start our own practice or firm, whatever it would be. So, I guess for me, I just always had that in mind as kind of like the end game of all of this. Like Jonathan, I think the thing that was also just kind of a personal driver for it is, I too had a little bit of independence, and I don't know if I call it, anti-authoritism in me. I respect authority that I feel is competent and basically has their stuff together, but in a lot of firms, that's not necessarily the case. And I just kind of felt that you can kind of take your own destiny in your own hands and certainly chart the course that you want by starting your own firm. I like to be challenged. I like to learn new things, and there's plenty of that when basically you're kind of out on your own. I think one of the most difficult things for us when we started up is we started up just in time for the 2008 recession. So, we were originally focusing on mixed-use residential. That market just completely just tanked and went away. And we had to quickly just kind of tear up our business plan. And, first of all, we had to recognize that the market was changing. And whatever precepts and concepts that we had, we just had to just let go of that. And we quickly went into the public sector world. And, we started off with, quite frankly, they weren't the greatest jobs, but they paid the bills. We did a lot of administrative construction management work, which may not have been interesting, but guess what? We got regular checks out of it. And from there, we kind of built those relationships and we're able to kind of get the trustless clients and go on and get more interesting projects, later on. I certainly want to echo something that Jennifer was saying is, whether you're a professional in corporate or a professional that's basically starting your own firm, I do think that it's helpful to basically have your own kitchen cabinet of advisors, of mentors, of people that have, are either on this journey or ideally have been a little bit further down this journey, it is a learning exercise. Learning from other people that have basically been down the roads that can tell you what to do, not to do, is just invaluable along the way.
Thanks, Doug. Audrey, what made you decide to start a firm?
Yeah, for me, I think it was just kind of things happened to fall into place. I was working at a larger firm after having been at a smaller firm where I kind of got a peek into what it might be like to run my own firm. And so I had that seed in my head about like, oh, that might be really cool. And I like a lot of those things. And I like doing that kind of businessy networking and financial side of things. And so when I got kind of the opportunity to, somebody asked you for advice, and then somebody asked you for a little favor, and then you get a little project, and then all of a sudden you've got a body of work behind you and people that can vouch for you. And so when that happened enough, it was like, oh, I should probably do this. It kind of happened on its own without too much kind of planning for it. But in hindsight, I had been kind of like gathering all the tools all the way along. And with every kind of even miniature jobs that I took, I was always kind of looking to my toolkit to say like, oh, if I'm doing this, then how am I going to do it the next way? How am I going to do it if I did this a little bit differently? How could I do it a little bit better, a little bit more?
So improving on iterations. I don't know if everyone
Yeah,
lost signal.
Audrey said her internet isn't great.
Oh,
so
sorry.
There might be
I'm
a
looking.
little
Yeah.
in and out.
You're back.
Yeah, sorry. Of course it happens when there's things.
Okay, well, we will move on to the second question.
Hey, Lisa?
Oh, sorry?
Am I clear now?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah, I don't know what you guys heard, if anything.
I heard improving on iterations and creating a firm, that kind of happened naturally as you were working at another firm and just kind of formed itself, but that you are always kind of doing the due diligence to be where you're at right now.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So success, how did you measure it is the question. So Doug, let's start with you. How did you anticipate measuring success when you started your firm?
I think for me, it comes down to, am I happy with what I'm doing? Do I like the freedom and flexibility doing what I'm doing? And certainly there's financial aspects. But I guess the way to just hold it down is, am I making money and I'm happy doing what I'm doing? I think they're like the two big aspects of that. Like I said, the financial remuneration is one thing, but it's just, I think a lot of us did this because we want to be challenged and we want to kind of chart our own path. And to the extent I feel free and flexible and do that, and you can lead a team to basically do great projects and hopefully make a difference in the world. That's to me how I kind of measure it.
Wonderful. And how has that changed over the years?
I think, for me, every year you kind of want to grow and kind of want to do something different. You don't want to just do a repeat of the same old. So in terms of how that's evolved, I think it's kind of more about, okay, you've got some interesting projects, you're making money. Awesome. Can you start building a good corporate culture and that basically have people stay around for the long term? Can you start building long-lasting relationship with clients that basically have essentially, sponsors that basically just kind of give you work for the long term? So I guess the definition of what exactly I'm doing in terms of objectives to fulfill that might change. But again, am I happy? Are we doing good work? Are we making money? I think that's still kind of the core of measuring what success is.
Wonderful. Dominique, how do you anticipate measuring success? Maybe Dominique's frozen, or? Okay. Jennifer, would you like to answer the question?
Sure. I'll start with, in the beginning, I definitely measured it based on, how many projects we were getting and what the bank account looked like, just because it was kind of survival in the beginning. I think now it's definitely more based on, similar to the first answer, which is, am I feeling fulfilled creatively, and am I feeling fulfilled just in terms of my work-life balance? And I know that's kind of a common thing to hear, but I really don't want to be working 80 hours a week. That's never been my goal. And it's important to me to be able to balance those things. So I definitely measure it based on opportunities. So I annually will do a leadership retreat by myself, and actually create a visioning board and set some goals for the year. And I'll put those on the wall in my office and reflect on them throughout the year. Those things include building my network and the directions I want to. It includes project types. It includes technology I want to start researching and integrating into the firm. So I definitely measure it based on those things. And then also my own personal happiness, and the happiness of my employees is also important to me. I want to make sure that they're getting to experience things in the workplace that they that make them feel like they're growing. And I will occasionally check in and say, are you enjoying this? And just to make sure, we should all be enjoying our work, not just me. So those are definitely the primary important measures of success. And I think another really important one is relationships with my clients. And a lot of my work is single family. So those become very personal relationships, and a lot of them are lasting relationships. I've developed some friendships with clients, and it's very rewarding to me to be able to spend time in the spaces that we work on together and drink a glass of wine around the kitchen island. So those are definitely the ways I measure success.
Thanks. Jonathan, how do you measure success?
It's interesting because I was thinking your question was sort of when you're first starting off. I've been doing this for now close to 20 years, and I kind of feel almost like I'm running a corporation and not very entrepreneurial at this moment, although it's been a long journey to get here. So success now is different. My mind quickly went to sort of starting off and when you're in a smaller firm. And my first thought was, I didn't have any time or space to even ask those type of questions. I mean, I just felt I was so busy. I'm amazed by Jennifer talking about kind of being able to keep it in control and in proportion and that kind of thing. For me, when I started out, I just worked around the clock. I was so busy. Part of it was fear, right? Like so much I didn't know that I needed to fall. There was the exposure, the liability, things go wrong that now I look back were minor bumps in the road, but I thought would be catastrophic just because I didn't have perspective at the time or confidence. And so there really wasn't much measuring. When things were good, it was clear to see that things were going great and we were getting good jobs and we were making money. And when things were bad, I didn't have time to be questioning, why are they bad and how does this feel? I just was trying to put out the fires and race to the next thing. So was
there a certain point where you started to anticipate how you were going to measure success?
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think it was really when I started bringing on partners and having conversations that were outside of my head. There was a lot of leadership that wasn't necessarily so disciplined because I didn't have to talk to myself. I knew what I thought, and so I just did stuff. And it was when I started kind of empowering other people and stepping out of the way and making sure that we were aligned and had the same vision or compatible directions or that kind of thing, that then we started to have to communicate about what we were trying to do and what were our successes, what were our failures or our problems that we needed to solve. So, now there's a ton of measurements. There's all the financial ones that I didn't at all concern myself early on. We made money when we made money and we didn't when we didn't, but I was living in my basement and had low overhead. And I compared it to a previous job where I didn't have much compensation. So it was a low bar to beat when I went out on my own. But now, you know, we've got employees and we want to be competitive with our salaries, and, you know, my partners want to, you know, raise kids and send them to school and take vacations and stuff. So now there's a whole different line of matrix. And so now we have the financial measures of success. We have the cultural ones about, you know, are people happy, and is there low job turnover, and are we able to land the jobs that we want to, and in the new project types that we're seeking. And so we kind of set goals and then we measure them and see how we're doing. So now we're a lot more rigorous and disciplined about all of those measurements. But it was, you know, 10 or 15 years of me slogging away before I even started asking those type of questions, to be honest.
Okay, well, thank you. Dominique, how did you anticipate measuring success when you started your firm?
Well, I'd say probably similar to others. I think the first year was really, you know, making sure our systems are in place and that we were actually still in business and that we were profitable. But I think longer term, and believe it or not, even more so now during this downturn, I think focusing on doing work that we believe in, and that has a definitive impact on people's lives. And like other folks have said, doing work that really feeds our soul. And obviously for me, that's like a greater connection to making, but for every person, it's sort of abstract and will be very individual. I think early on, maybe because I was new to San Francisco and I just loved inundating myself in the new environment, but also ongoing now, I think locating myself in environments and situations where I'm interacting with people, potential clients, collaborators that are interested or even just open to doing projects that are sort of aligned with my platform has been really helpful. So early on, that was working at firms that were, you know, doing work that I wanted to be doing long-term, sitting on boards. I've joined a ton of committees, teaching at Berkeley, juror at schools, writing publications. So all of those things kind of create an ecosystem around you that allows this idea of doing work that feeds your soul to be a possibility. And so instead of focusing merely on dollar signs, I think having that full spectrum is actually the way that we measure success.
Great. I think we got a full encompassing view of success and how it can be different for every single firm owner. Survive or thrive. So Jonathan, what tactics did you take during the last recession to survive, and what practices did you keep after the recession?
It's interesting. In 2008, work dried up for everyone. We were heavily focused on single family residences at the time, and that was one of the most resilient sectors. So typically, you know, architects think diversification is going to protect you in a recession, but our lack of diversification in the Bay Area residential has historically just been more resilient during these downturns. You know, I was a pretty small firm at that time, and so we didn't have too much overhead, too much commitment to rent and expenses. We were very lean, but we all went part-time. We encouraged each other to take vacations and trips and things that we always wanted to do, but never could because we had too much work. So we just, you know, our work did slow down, but it rebounded pretty quick in the last one. This recent one has been challenging because we had 20 people and a whole lot of our projects went on hold right away. So there was just a real scramble to try to figure out, like, we just couldn't keep all of our staff for 3 months of payroll without, you know, going deeply into debt. And so we scrambled to try to pull everyone down to part-time. And try to stretch out our works. We spent a lot of time on business development trying to get the work that we thought might be able to continue to move faster so that we could stay busy. A lot of time was spent shuffling around, moving projects from one person who was slow to another person, all right, from the more busy people to the slower one, convincing some projects who had a lot of work, you know, can we go twice as fast? Can we put a team of 6 people on your project to keep things moving? and then a lot of scrambling to try to see if we can get these, you know, government PPP loans to help subsidize us, which ended up saving us to a large extent. But really it was a focus on business development and bringing in new work, which was super challenging, but ultimately has been successful and has helped us, you know, stave off some cuts and downsizing. So we're doing okay. It's been really rocky, and it's been all hands on deck to try to keep things moving. But boy, you learn a lot during these times. That's not about design, but that's about kind of running businesses and how to measure, you know, the type of things that matter to you, your key performance index and your, you know, what's your dashboard of things you need to look at every single week to just see whether, where the crisis is and where your attention needs to go. So there's just been a lot of scrambling.
Putting out those fires. So Doug, I know you also, you know, got a start during the recession. Do you have, like, what tactics did you use and did you keep after that recession to help your company survive and thrive?
Yeah, I think part of it, you know, for us was diversification. You know, we kind of were in one market that was basically rapidly going down, and we have since then basically been at least, you know, 3 or 4 market sectors, you know, simply because you can't be, you know, a jack of all trades, but it's, in our mind, you can't be a one-trick pony either. You should have about 3 or 4 things that you do well, clients will seek you out for. So, you know, for us, we've done a lot of civic commercial, we've done a lot of aviation work, you know, we've done some multifamily, you know, and we've done transportation as well. Long story short is, if you have the curves and cycles of basically several things, you know, you're not dependent upon the curve of one market. You know, while those things can basically kind of work to kind of level themselves out, if you basically add them cumulatively. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is we were not afraid to take on, you know, I would say work that may not have necessarily been very interesting at the time. You know, like the construction management work is really administration work, but it's good work and basically produced good paychecks at the time. You know, right now during the current recession, we're doing a project for community college district where we are replacing 2,500 doors, you know, basically throughout 6 campuses. It is a mind-numbing work. We are getting 7-digit compensation for it as well. So I can't shy away from, you know, those types of numbers. So, and that helps us keep alive and keep going for more interesting assignments that are definitely a lot more, you know, fulfilling. So we kind of look at our projects like a sandwich. You can't eat all bread. You can't have all salami. You put it together, it's a nice sandwich you can work with. That's what we try to go for as well. And then I think those for us are kind of like the 2 biggest things. During the last recession, we did things like, for example, we temporarily took on landscape architects because we saw an opportunity where the landscape architect for the airport, the Oakland Airport connector, was not even contemplated by the engineering prime that was working on it. So we kind of approached them and said, we'll do the landscape architecture for you. We have 2 landscape architects working, you know, during the recession for us, and that kept things going, you know, during those rather tough times. So those are the type of strategies that we've kind of looked at.
And have you kept any of those after the recession?
No, I mean, we basically, you know, long story short is that was just not something that we could sustain for the long term. You know, as I said, you know, we want to concentrate in those areas that we are, you know, we want to do 4 or 5 things well. So, you know, clients will seek us out. Obviously, there's a lot of, you know, landscape architects who are out there, but, you know, that was an opportunity that we're willing to seize on for the moment in order to keep the lights going.
Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of pivoting, shifting the firm mentality, you know, taking on work that you might not otherwise, but, you know, keeping the lights on.
I think the 2 things is this: the only thing constant in this world is change. You know, you always have to keep changing with change. Just because something was doesn't mean it will be. You know, and I think realizing that everything's always fluid and nimble and basically kind of adjusting to that is certainly a huge thing. And, you know, again, I think the realization is honestly in our profession, some of the things that basically may not necessarily be the most interesting, you know, projects are actually some of the most lucrative projects for the precise reason nobody else wants to deal with it, and people will pay a premium for that, especially things that are technically challenging. So I think having a balance between those things that you find interesting, between those things that may not be as interesting, but basically pay the bills, I think is a helpful way of keeping going.
Wonderful, thanks, Doug. So navigating your locale, Audrey, we'll start with you. What unique challenges about your practice in San Francisco, or what do you find uniquely challenging about practicing in San Francisco versus other cities?
I think for me, one of the most striking things about San Francisco is just how many jurisdictions there are and how different each one is. That you can go 10 miles and you're in a completely different kind of just ecosystem of who you can talk to and what they're going to be open to and what the rules are and what the procedures are. And so when you're starting out, it really is, every new project is, you just have to start from scratch and you have to assume that you know nothing about how that process is going to go. And it's a learning experience every time. So it's definitely a challenge and it's unique to San Francisco, but it also keeps you remembering and, you know, never forgetting that it really is, each project is really its own special snowflake, and each project is different and you have to do your homework every time because each jurisdiction has a totally different protocol. And until you know all of them, which, you know, nobody's ever going to know all of them. There's just so many, each neighborhood has its own kind of jurisdictional feel to it. So it's just a lot of kind of prep work, and then combine that with like the stakes being so high here. One thing about San Francisco, it's such a high barrier to entry for anything, for commercial clients, for residential clients. You know, they're putting down $1 million on a pile of junk, an uninhabitable house. And so then you're saying, okay, so let's spend another $1 million. And they're like, what? That was everything. So you kind of really get into this high stakes game that doesn't happen everywhere. And it turns out great projects because people put their heart and soul into them and it is their everything. So it makes for great work, but it really is, you're dealing with a lot of heart all the time.
No, I like that perspective that you have, like, because you're putting in so much money, like the investment and appreciation for it is higher.
Yeah, for sure. Which I love.
Yeah, that's great. Dominique, would you like to answer what is uniquely challenging about practicing in San Francisco versus other cities?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've noticed is that most of the influential work is being built by corporations. And I think that's happening obviously in San Francisco, but I think maybe is the same across the United States. Whether it's a developer or a corporation that's building a project for themselves. And I think in that way there's less of an intimacy or experimentation or advancement that's likely to happen in most cases compared to what you might see if it was being led by a cultural institution or a visionary leader or a program led by a municipality that had some vision. So I think that the risk is that the intention for the outcome is quite different than it would be in the other cases. So I think many of the opportunities we're seeing are sort of building safe, reliable, mediocre buildings and not architecture. So that's one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing.
I know you're on a lot of different boards in San Francisco. Do you feel like this might shift at all? If not, I think changing your practice because of that.
I think I've been very much formed by the boards that I've been sitting on and seeing where the vision lies with the city and also all of the processes that are put in place that are between the vision that the city does have and actually allowing that to manifest. So I think this is not atypical for cities right now, but in San Francisco, I'm a little bit closer to the topic. So it has directly influenced how we practice. I think we work with a lot of private institutions. We work with a lot of corporations in trying to get the public entity and the contributions to the urban environment in their projects is a top priority. I think being able to build an urban city that is accessible to wider demographic, I think it has to happen in these otherwise private institutions.
Definitely. Jonathan, I know that you practice in San Francisco, but also have a lot of projects outside of the city. What do you find uniquely challenging about practicing in San Francisco versus those other locales?
Well, certainly the permit process, the approvals, and specifically the planning department, although right now the building department seems to be shut down as well because of the pandemic, and a lot of people still being paid full time, but not necessarily working and processing permits. But the planning department has just, since I've started practicing 25 years ago, has always been a mess. And it's always been people copping in there trying to fix it, and that fix usually fixes half of it but messes it up, and then they get thrown out, so their intended fix never gets fully implemented. So we have a layer upon layer of half fixes that just creates a mess. So really it's just completely inconsistent and hard to predict what you can do to building, certainly on the single family home front, the residential home front here. So navigating all of that, navigating the time frames, the frustratingly long process, the fact that some things that the clients ask you to do that you really shouldn't be allowed to do, sometimes you can sail through and have no problem. And other things that should be super simple and non-controversial, you get bogged down because of some strange rogue planner or some vigilante neighbor who comes out and creates a fuss. And so there's just a lot of headaches with all of that. It's my least favorite part of architecture is dealing with the uncertainties of unpredictable planning processes. So the amount we have to communicate with our clients up front to kind of set expectations is pretty intense. And it's such a long, painful path for some of these projects. It makes me very much not want to do a lot of San Francisco projects, just because of the pain factor. Pain to reward ratio there is pretty low. And so we do more and more. And I know many architects who say, I just don't do those type of projects anymore. Now that I have a choice, I run from that stuff. So we still do it. I love San Francisco. I really am committed to making it an amazing place, and I want to be engaging here. But we can only take on so much of that without it eating our soul and depleting us emotionally. So that, the other thing I was going to mention was just sort of the high cost of everything, which just makes managing budgets so incredibly important and challenging and tricky. But that's not a San Francisco thing. That's more of a regional thing. It's no different in Napa or the Peninsula or other places that we're building in San Francisco. But I see so many architects get tripped up with budget management and expectation management. Half the potential projects that we get, we really challenge what the budget expectations are before we take them on, because so many times we've been deep into a project to realize that they never should have taken on this project once they realized what the true costs were. So we really are pretty disciplined about getting that out of the way at the beginning as a litmus test, a filter for what is going to be a project that we can make them happy and we aren't going to end up being frustrated as well by.
How do you navigate that conversation? Do you kind of tell them ahead of time that there's a range in a budget, to be expected? The contingency is not 15%, it's 30%.
I'm okay with a 15% contingency as long as the basis for the number is much, much higher than, so many conversations start with, I heard that you could build for $500 a square foot, or whatever the number is that they throw out there. And I think it's just we've gotten really good at challenging those assumptions and giving them the tough love on day one, and knowing that some other architect is going to tell them something that they want to hear and that's going to sound more attractive to them. And they're going to very likely go off and work with that other project and get frustrated, much like I did with them a while ago at the beginning of my career. So life's too short to be the architect who is telling them what they want to hear, so that you can have a happy 3 months of conceptual design followed by everybody hating each other for the next 3 years. So And I tell them that too. So hopefully, you know, a lot of people are smart and a lot of people kind of know the truth is out there somewhere if they're willing to look at it. So, I mean, the bottom line is all of us need to find good clients that we can align with to do any type of meaningful work in any capacity. And so I just use that budget as one of the defining tests to see who is this client, you know, are their expectations in alignment with their aspirations, right? I think that is the thing that we need to figure out before we start working for them, not while we're in the middle of working with them. And that conversation is usually a very productive conversation for us to kind of test whether this is going to be a good fit for us.
Definitely. Thank you. So we're going to start to wrap up. Like to go through every one of you and ask, what would you say to your younger self if you had to start your practice over again? I know some of you have started, you know, fairly recently. We will start with Audrey.
All right. So I think, yeah, I don't know. There isn't anything direct that I would kind of like do differently. I think there was a lot of mistakes made. And I think the biggest thing to like say to myself would be that these mistakes are all kind of, you know, tools that you pick up along the way, and you just got to take a deep breath and keep going, because it's going to happen again. And you know, you learn every time that something bad, what you think is the end of the world at the time, it's really just a blip on the radar, and you keep going and you learn from it. And then the other thing is that like those systems that you set up on day one actually really matter down the road. And so it's one thing that I think I did decently well was to set up my systems early on. And I think leaning even more into that early on is super helpful to really be diligent about doing things in a timely way, you know, actually following your billing and your finances and following your kind of business development side of things, and really kind of treating yourself like a formal business, even when you aren't technically, you know, all set up yet, and just kind of pretending as though you're a lot bigger than you are, and it pays off in the end.
I think that also helps with confidence, and then with trust.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Helps to build that. Jennifer, what would you say to your younger self, you know, if you had to start over again?
Yeah, I saw this question in your email. I think the biggest thing I would do is take a business class. It's something that I know in architecture schools, we had those professional practice classes, but honestly, they were kind of a joke, and more of like a way to idolize really awesome firms, which was great, but we didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of how to run a firm. And I'm grateful I got to work for small firms where I got to wear many hats and see the invoicing process and contracts and things like that. But I think taking a business class would be something that I would do and maybe should still do. But thankfully, I am working with kind of small business advisors who are helpful in that regard. But I would also say don't undervalue your work. I think oftentimes as a new practice, we will tend to try to get projects and undervalue our time or give away time that maybe we shouldn't. Obviously, sometimes it's important to be flexible in those situations, but it usually just ends up in heartache and stress and spending time on things that you maybe shouldn't be. But yeah, I think also just keep going.
Doug,
you got this.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So Doug, you have your MBA. What would you say to having a business degree? Do you feel like that's helped you?
It is. I would say the MBA has been incredibly helpful. You know, I think the simple truth is, despite our ideals, this world runs on money. You know, it is simple and pure as that for basically right now. And understanding how to basically translate your ideas to make sense to your client in that context can be incredibly helpful. You know, basically trying to tell somebody who is very business-minded focused that this is the right thing for the planet probably is not going to gain much traction. Telling them that, hey, this will not only basically improve the attractiveness of your facility to new clients, but it basically help your internal rate of return in our project is a good way of basically kind of getting the same message across, but kind of like in the words. So to me, it's, if you can't get a business degree, certainly get exposure to how a practice kind of works, you know, either with the firm that you're working within. If you can basically take a, you know, architectural practice exam, understanding the nuts and bolts of how firms run and make money, I think is a critical aspect to all of this.
Thanks, Doug. Dominique, what would you tell your younger self?
Well, I definitely would make that list of, I'll start my firm when I have this figured out. I would have made that much sooner because that really helped, like I said, in the beginning, build confidence and like kind of go through and tackle all those things so that you're ready to go. I think that I would have maybe made a poster to remind myself to always be open to being vulnerable, open to knowing that I don't know things, and open to continually reassessing. That is something we do all the time. And then I would say for other folks and for myself, what was really important is really knowing yourself, knowing what are the things that really will bring you joy. If you're going to run a business, it's tough. There's a ton of things that you have to do and you have to juggle. And so it has to be something you enjoy doing. Otherwise it just becomes work or it just becomes a job. And the other thing is understanding if you really do want to be a soul of a practice, especially if you really, I initially really wanted to be more engaged in projects. And as a business owner, you're initially, at least when you're doing many things, you're not that engaged in projects. You're also engaged in running a business. So finding other people that have different talents than you and pairing up with them and doing a more collaborative practice, I think is a really beneficial approach versus this idea that we just have to be this, you know, independent soul thing. You can be independent with others and that you all can balance each other out to allow yourself to be doing the work that you really love.
Great, thank you. I do think it's very important to be honest with yourself and what your abilities are and what your intentions are for the practice. Jonathan, what would you tell your younger self?
I was thinking more along the lines that has been mentioned by other people about having more confidence, and specifically thinking in conversations with the client. I remember specifically, and I see it with my younger staff, about asking the client, well, what do you want? We're here to serve you. You know what you're looking for. How do we adjust things? And I feel like there's been a shift in realization that most people don't know, right? They have some initial thoughts, but they need to be guided, and you really need to advocate for what you think good design is. Often we have a really good idea and a really good indication of where something will go. And if that's the case, just show them that. Don't say, and I'm going to give you 3 other ideas, because what I've learned is if you show something that you don't like to them, that may be what you end up building. Like, filter it and guide them. And you can always say, look, I just, out of efficiency, this is the thing that came to mind. It feels really good to me. We'll go back and give more ideas if you don't like it. But rather than to take the time to draw things that you think are the B and C level solutions, I find more and more that clients really are looking for some guidance and some leadership. And along those lines also, when a client asks for something that you know is an awful idea, and this happens to me so frequently, it happens to all of us, not quickly figuring out how to kind of make the least bad version of that idea, but to really have the confidence to say, well, that's really interesting. Why are you asking for that specific thing? What's the why behind the idea? Because you're always trying to solve a problem with every idea, whether it's good or bad, and the problems are all legitimate. So if we can kind of dial back to what is the problem you're trying to solve with that bad idea, then maybe we can come up with some idea that we love and that you'll love even better that solves that idea. And so many times I see bad ideas getting put into place because the client asked for it, or because somebody in a position of authority is jamming it down the project's throat. And I feel like having the confidence to challenge it and say, we're not opposed to solving that problem. By no means do we know what your problems are better than you are, but we maybe could come about it from a different angle once we understand the forces that are pushing you for that idea. So So
Great.
and all of that just circles back to confidence and knowing that they're hiring you because you have experience and opinion and the skill. And yes, you're not an expert on everything at all, but you are in a position to guide them, and you're doing them a disservice if you don't use that position to help guide them forward.
Definitely. They're hiring you. They're not hiring anyone else. They're hiring you for your opinion and for your expertise. So keeping that in mind always. That's great. Okay, well, I want to open it up for questions and then also let everyone know that this is a two-part series and that the next one we're going to be doing breakout rooms and talking about surviving the pandemic. So let me go to questions to see. You can type it into the chat.
Yeah, there's a couple questions that are on chat, and I've seen Douglas has been answering them as well.
Oh, okay.
So greatly appreciated. I can read off the questions to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Do you want to kind of highlight the time and date for part 2, just in case we don't go through all of the questions?
Yes. So part 2 is going to be in November on the 9th at 6:30 to 8 p.m.
Yeah, it's a longer session as well. So hopefully we'll have more discussion going on. So one question that I see here, it says, did any of you consider starting with a partner versus being sole practitioner? For those who have been who have partners now, how was that impacted the practice?
I can probably answer that, but for my sake, I did start with a business partner. And the cool thing is he and I knew each other, and the thing I like about our business is we happen to be bestest friends as well as business partners, which has basically been incredibly helpful. And we are very complementary to each other. He's in a way kind of my polar opposite, but in essence, you know, it means where I'm weak on, he's strong on, and vice versa. And I think finding combinations like this where, you know, people think differently and people, you know, kind of fill in each other's weak spots, you know, is helpful. Having those relationships where people can challenge each other and still be friends. You know, I hate to say this, but it's just, you know, the more successful businesses are the ones where people constantly ask themselves questions because it's how to get better. When people just kind of always kind of have the same mindset and just kind of walk lockstep together, that's when you have kind of more of an issue. But I think, you know, having a business partner has been incredibly helpful for, you know, our success. And there's definitely a lot of good solo practitioners out there, but if you can find a partner or partners that you all can work together, you know, I think it's a good way to go.
I can hop in on that question. I started out on my own, and for a long time, I really kind of craved having a partner. I felt very isolated, and I also felt torn in a million directions. And so conceptually, it always seemed great to have a partner. But I also know many people who had partners and had compatibility problems with their partners. I think the analogy of a partnership is like a marriage is not overstating it by any means.
Nope.
It's you're stuck with the partner, and with, you know, you may have different vision, different risk tolerances, different design ideas, different financial requirements, and desire to do good in the world versus make money versus work your butt off versus whatever. And so all of those incompatibilities are problems. And so the complexity of what you're taking on with a partner in some ways is double, you know, it just magnifies all your other problems. So I feel like my road was really good, which was I really wanted a partner for a long time, but it was only after 12 years of practice that I brought on a partner. And I brought on somebody who I was very compatible with, and frankly, he was heavily vetted, but I also think I got incredibly lucky about how compatible we were in ways that I would not have anticipated. And there's no looking back, it's way better with this partner, but I know people who've taken on the wrong partner and can tell you a very different story. So as attractive and beneficial as it is, it's also one of those proceed with extreme caution type of things in my view.
So
And
we're over by 5 minutes. If everyone wants to stay on, we can answer one more question.
There are,
Oh, sorry.
there are a couple more questions on the chat.
Okay, yeah, if everyone doesn't mind staying on, we'll ask a couple more questions. Jane?
Yeah, so we have a question from Elisa. Did any of you consider starting, oh, we did that question, sorry. She had another question. With high construction cost, complex permitting, how do you approach your fees, balancing making them affordable for a client and match cost to do work?
You know, I think for us, it's just, I think one other panelist said it, don't underestimate your value, especially for massive projects. And, you know, I think Jonathan hit it on the nail on the head in terms of basically trying to make sure your clients have an accurate grip on reality. I mean, we have clients come to us all the time. It's said like, oh, I think it's going to cost X and it's going to cost Y, or it's going to take this long. We tell them actually it's going to cost probably double your figure. It's going to take about 2 or 3 times as long. And if they're having an issue with it, I'd rather know now and say like, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. As opposed to somebody might listen and kind of take it on. So I think vetting a good client is the first thing. But, you know, I think the big thing is don't price yourself on the cheapest and the race for the bottom. Don't price yourself on the most expensive. I mean, let's say the rates are, but make sure that you're selling a good service and you're basically pricing yourself so you can do a good, complete job. If you can't do a complete job, it means that you're not going to make money. You're going to have an unhappy client, and you might as well just forego the whole thing in the first place.
The other thing, oh, sorry. Oh, okay. I was going to say that the other thing for us that's been helpful is in terms of like vetting your clients, a lot of times just giving your what your fee is going to be, or kind of really outlining those costs up front does the vetting for that project, because it can really speak miles for how the project's going to go. If somebody's like, oh, that's way too much, then it's probably what they're going to say to the contractor when they get that estimate back on what it's going to be. And that kind of is a really telling sign. So often if you are comfortable with your fees and you feel that you've like covered your costs and you convey that to your clients, it's a pretty good indicator of how things are going to go.
I find it really interesting that people still think that architectural fees are negotiable. They aren't. The service we provide is negotiable. We can scale it down if that's where your fee lies, or that's where it lies. So I always try to be very clear about, first from our end, due diligence, coming up with a work plan to say how long it's going to take for the team to do the work, and then balancing that against the rules of thumb of construction costs and things like that are norms in the market, and then being really clear, like this is my estimate. I'm assuming this type of service, this many meetings, this many iterations. Does that work for you? If the fee's too high, then I say, okay, well, let's take out some of these iterations. Or if the fee's too low, which I've also had, say, actually, we want a little bit more handheld service. We want you to meet with us every week. We want to have every single material and finish like sample in our hands. And so I think approaching it as a conversation is a really healthy way to start any project. But our fees are not negotiable. It takes time, and we provide staff and team to work on the project, and it takes that many hours. And I think having confidence in that and allowing the client to choose. And I love when I worked with Jeannie Gang in Chicago at Studio Gang. She said at one point, oh, not everyone is a client. And that's really, really true. If you can approach it as a conversation in a stable way, and they still try to say, well, it's not worth that, it might just not be a project for you. There will always be somebody else that can and will do it cheaper. And they may not be in business in a year. That's not your concern. So really knowing what it takes for your fee to stand on its own is really important.
I think everyone said really great things. I just wanted to add one more. We started charging consult fees recently, which has been very eye-opening because it really weeds out the people who aren't serious about projects. And if they can't stomach paying a consult fee for a little bit of your time for you to educate them about the process and explain the fees and the construction costs and the permitting and all of that, then they're really, like you said, Dominique, not a client. So that's been huge for us in terms of just weeding out the people who aren't going to value your time.
Great. We have a question from Louise. What is a rule of thumb in regards to projects you should take, and which ones should you pass? I think that's related to client question as well. We're getting at.
I think kind of similar to what everyone just spoke to. We want to take maybe the next one.
Sure. Jamila has a question. Can you expand on setting on a business plan and business structure, finding your business niche regarding the market?
So I think this is a fairly in-depth question to answer. So I'm not sure if that's, I'll try to answer it quickly. I started as a sole proprietor and then moved over to a corporation. You know, and I think it was Audrey who was saying how, you know, treating it like, you know, a corporation, even if you don't feel like a corporation yet, is really important. So having all those practices in place. I also did what Jennifer did, which was go to the Small Business Association and start getting all of that framework so that I can figure out what the typical business structures are. But I too wish I did an MBA so that I would already know what that is. So just doing your research ahead of time, which it's not little, it's going to take a while. So
I was going to add to that I do think a lot of architects, and I was one of them, don't do a business plan and don't set your annual goals and all of those type of things. We do all of that now, but I think if you've got projects and you have profit at the end of the year, you don't see the incentive of doing that. But switching to a mentality, a mindset of saying, what are we trying to achieve? What is our 10-year goal? What is our 3-year goal? What are we going to try to do this year to get us somewhere? And really just kind of switching to an idea that you're proactively running your business and heading it in a direction. I think so many architects, especially when they're starting out, are reactive, and they're just trying to grab a job and then trying to put out fires until the job's done and not pull their head out of the sand and think of where they want to head. And I think there's so much benefit and upside from some kind of visioning. You know, I can't remember, was it Jennifer who said she does these annual retreats, or Dominique? But that's brilliant. And I wish I had done that a long time earlier. We do that stuff now, but any kind of like just getting that white space to think about what's a better version of your business and what kind of architect do you want to be 5 years down the road, and what can you do this year to move you just baby steps in that direction, those type of things. And those will start leading you towards financial aspirations and goals and needs and things to measure on a week to week or month or quarterly basis, and just start allowing you to be more sophisticated. One other thing is I joined a group of, you know, I think it'd be great to get an MBA. I think who has time in some ways to stop your profession and your career to go out and go to night school maybe. That's ambitious, doable, but ambitious. But there are a lot of organizations. I'm a member of a CEO's group, which is just sort of people from different companies who all meet, and somebody comes and teaches you about marketing and finance and HR and business development and all of those type of things. And so I feel like I've been kind of getting my business supplemental information, and there's a lot of ways to do that by getting in these peer business groups. You know, there's YPO, there's Vistage, there's all these different types of groups like that. And that's a really wonderful support for most of us who were not trained in business with any kind of rigor, to supplement us as we go out and put on that entrepreneurial hat.
And then one more thing I was going to add to that is that it's a work in progress all the time. It's a thing like you have to read your monthly reports about how you're doing in order to think about the next quarter, in order to think about the next year, in order to think about the next 5 years, the next 10 years. And so it is setting a plan, but then it's monitoring the plan and tracking it and changing it, because it is always changing too.
I also think the clarity of monthly check-ins, financial check-ins, quarterly, your projections is that it really helps you also to justify your fee that you're sending out. It really builds confidence. And sometimes like when you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I could ask for another 20,000, and you kind of look and you're like, actually, I really need that 20,000. And then you realize to the client that 20,000 was a non-issue, you know? And you're not doing it just to kind of pad your bank, but because that's what it really takes to run your staff. So knowing what your overhead number is, and that's rent, that's professional, you know, legal fees, that's liability insurances, that's programs, like all the stuff, knowing what you have for overhead and knowing what it pays to have employees, retain those employees, provide them health insurance, really knowing those numbers helps you in all aspects. So even though it may seem like a technical task, if you don't like spreadsheets, it actually helps you build that confidence because you have a full picture of your business.
Yeah, actually, it ties into the next question I have on here, and it's by Yonglan, and he or she's asking, can the small practitioners share their experience of assessing when it was a sweet spot to expand? On the first hire, for example, how did you analyze cash flow versus projected revenue?
I can start, although this might be a little harder for me because I started my practice first part-time for myself with staff. And then, but when I really launched full-time, I had big projects already. So knowing when to expand was really like, okay, we have another project, but also knowing when those projects are going to be out there and already having connection to people who you know you'd be a good fit to your firm. It's not just that you need somebody, but who that person is. You will find that those are two very different things because one person who really fits the ethos of the studio can, you know, do so much more sometimes than even two new unrelated employee hires. So that's part of it as well.
I think I was going to add to that is just, you know, get to know and love spreadsheets, you know, because a lot of it is just as simply as, you know, let me take the work that I think I'm getting over the next few months I have in hand. Let me just kind of put together the monthly revenue, you know, month by month. Let me stack that against basically the cost I have. And, you know, if I subtract it out, what is my profit and where's it at? And for us, that's basically how we kind of look at our revenue based on our cash flow analysis. We have what we call the cliff, which is basically related to backlog, you know, in terms of how much contracts we think we have in hand. To us, it's always kind of a push of having that cliff out be as far as possible. Ideally, you know, ideally 12 months or beyond. You know, if it gets narrower than 6 months, it's like, we need from our business development. But it's really just, what do I think I'm going to do over the next few months? Just rationally adding that up. And sometimes you just got to look at the numbers. What is my cost structure? Once there, and you also discover opportunity for, hey, I'm making a lot more money. Maybe it's time for us to kind of take on additional staff, or, oh shit, we have a problem coming up and we need to basically reduce our staff. But just having that projection, you know, with the spreadsheets is the basic tool to forecast it out.
Also that spreadsheet in the oh shit moment is also very inspiring for business development. You're in your own spirit. You see, like, I don't want to let go of any of these amazing people, and I see that 4 months out we're going to be in trouble, and you start reaching out to everybody you know. So it's very empowering spreadsheet. It's more than numbers.
It's scary, but having that oh shit moment, while it's still theoretical, 3 or 4 months, as you say, means you can do something about it. You know, what's an oh shit moment in the moment, you're going off the cliff, you're screwed. But, you know, to your point, it's empowering because I'm forecasting it, I'm ahead of it, therefore I can do something about it.
Yeah.
Great. So I have a question from King. He said the panelists mentioned that liability is a bump on the road, but it seems like a big bump. And how to better approach it and how to get yourself protected?
What was a big bump? I'm sorry, I kind of missed that.
Liability.
I would say make sure your contract is very clear in terms of your risk, and then also just obviously errors and omissions insurance, and document everything. Make sure you're scanning meeting notes, you're scanning drawings, you are putting things that you're talking about on the phone in writing and emails. I mean, maybe I'm a little paranoid, but I generally just try to document as much as possible, and hope for the best. Scanning all of our hand drawings. I've started actually doing a lot of my sketching on my iPad so I can eliminate the paper trail, or not the paper trail, but the paper, recycling, all that, making sure I don't have to scan a bunch of drawings. So that's just helped to have it already be in PDF form. But I think just generally documentation, making sure your contract is solid, and having errors and omissions insurance, which can cost quite a bit, but it's worth it.
I think errors and omissions
also
insurance, a lawyer is great. Before you sign a contract, sending it over to them, you'll pay them money, but it is worth that peace of mind. Definitely. And I think also there's other platforms I think that can be really helpful, Bluebeam and other things like that. So after you have a meeting, the notes are already there, you send it back. And if the folks on the other end of that say that didn't say anything, then it, you have yourself covered. So I always, especially as a small firm, use other people to help spread the work.
Yeah, I definitely second both things, and don't skip on the professional liability insurance as well, because I got to tell you, we didn't, we had a good broker kind of set us up, and the nice thing is you have a good policy. You will get the attorneys at no cost to you immediately during the pre-claim process to basically make things just kind of go away. And having that basically, having people, resources available to say that, hey, this was clearly not the person's scope, or, this is how it's going to go down, but basically kind of dissuade them from basically making the move in the first place is an incredibly helpful thing to have.
Great. We have a question from Rebecca. She's asking, has anyone become WBE or SBE? Has it been helpful?
We have become an SB and MBA. We did that at the end of the last recession, because as the private sector work started to dry up, we're just like, okay, well, we're looking for work. I'll use this avenue. It is a double-edged sword. I'll simply say it because, sure, it can help you get some opportunities, but sometimes the only value people think you have is you can kind of go through and check the box. Now, what we did during the recession during 2009, 2010 is we got our foot in the door, but we quickly worked with those clients to turn that relationship around, see the value in us, and continue on with them. But, there are some challenges with that. I think the thing that to me is always kind of challenging is I want people to value, us, our firm, because we're good architects and what we're good to do. And I think sometimes when you kind of check that, SBE box, you kind of dilute that, and we're in this supposedly this post-racial era where race doesn't matter, but then suddenly race kind of matters. So I won't deny that it's basically provided our firm benefits during the recession in terms of kind of getting us in front of public sector clients, but trying to ensure that you are valued not because of what box you can check, and you're valued for your actual work product. It's a big thing you got to achieve if you go that route.
Yeah, we've thought about it, and I actually started the application and got hung up on the part. So I was trying to apply for a woman-owned business status and a minority-owned business status, but I got hung up on the part where they needed my grandfather's death certificate, which I don't have, and I offered them my father's birth certificate, but it does not say that he's Hispanic. So unfortunately, that's where I got lost in the process. But I might go back and do the woman-owned business status. It's kind of a question of if we need to find work. And right now I don't feel that huge pressure, but I do see the appeal of, finding an IDIQ contract or something like that. Maybe with the Park Service, that would be a dream. But yeah, that's kind of where we stand on it.
I'm a woman-owned business, and there's a lot of loopholes to go through in order to get there. And to be honest, I actually haven't seen it pay off at all, and other than being prideful that I'm a woman-owned business. As far as getting new projects, I just would add that there's a misconception that just doing WBE or SBE puts you in some database where all of a sudden everybody's calling you for work. In fact, actually, you need to be pre-registered at multiple locations if you want to be available at universities for that, or with the city of San Francisco, or you have to also register there and pre-qualify there. So it's a lot of work. You have to know where to look, when to look, and I think the hard part with being a small business, women or minority owned, of course, as well, is you probably don't have much time to do all that paperwork. None of us have that person on our staff to just like go through the loopholes and check all the federal projects that are available. So it's kind of a tricky one. I haven't seen it, like I said, immediately pay off, but I am about to take the next step and qualify where I know I already have a connection to those entities that are looking for the SBE, LBE, WBE, or whatever. Already having the connection also really helps, but which is sort of against the intent of the SBE, MBE in the first place. So.
I think we addressed most of the questions. I think Douglas actually addressed some as well. We're approaching to 30 minutes over the time. So wondering if we are planning to wrap up.
I'm gonna have to drop her in a couple minutes, I'm afraid.
Marissa, you are on mute. I think you're trying to say something.
Yeah, I was just saying that, yeah, we would like to wrap up, and thanks everyone for spending the extra 30 minutes with us. So thank you all to our panelists, and again to AIASF for hosting this.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, the panelists, for joining, and all who tuned in. We have a part 2, so with the same panelists, so you guys can come back and ask more questions. We'll have a whole an hour and a half of that on November 29th. So thank you all. Thank you, Marissa, for championing. See you guys later. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you all.